Right. In light of today's discussion, I think the way I probably would do it is I'll just run through uh, kind of some of the practical usage of data and what people are doing in general in the market. And then after that, I'll probably open up for discussion. I think that's where the fun will be, where I think all of you might have different questions in terms of data. Let me just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen? Are you able to see this?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So just to run through some of a quick introduction about myself. So I've been actually working in the banking industry since 2005. And specifically, I kind of work for the global markets team, financial markets team in banks. And I used to do a lot of the sales trading platform work, as well as operations finance risk work in the bank. So one of the key things in my experience there was even in a bank itself, which is highly sophisticated, when it comes down to the way we work in teams, right? Data are very scattered and data are pretty much in silos. And a classical scenario is that a program that I run might have around 500 to 600 people. And each of these groups of people there might be around 30, 40 teams. And everyone will be on different platforms. Everyone will be using different set of data. And when we want to actually go back to our senior stakeholders and decide what we need to do, it's typically a very tough scenario to be in because you wouldn't have a good view of what is currently happening on the ground. And it's always hearsay, right? The number of people you talk to, they are the one that's going to inform you. And a lot of things is driven by guts. So during that 15 years, at the end of it in 2013, I decided, okay, let's call it a quits and let's try to solve the problem by bringing in data so that people can actually use it, make it easy, right? Collecting data should be easy. Processing shouldn't require someone to sit on the computer screen and Excel spreadsheet for 5, 6 hours to work on data and turn out to be erroneous or incorrect or still data that doesn't actually inform you of what the next step is. So that's where it started, where we built the product, and we have then decided to bring the product to outside of the banking industry to areas like F&B, retails, hospitality. And you can see a large similarity in those segments also, where the use of data is very bad. And most people are not at the state where they know what's going on. And one of the typical scenario of some of the experience we have, right? Even in the banks itself, right? There will be a vendor that comes in, and the vendor will be talking about how to best use their data points, how you can create all this dashboard, the analytics itself. But you see a lot of resistance against that by many of the people in the team. The more sophisticated companies like the bank, the more resistance, right? Because they'll say, I have X2, I have a Tableau, I have a ClickView, I have my own data lake, I have my own data mine. But the reality is, even though they have all this technology, people are still struggling internally to do the manual work, right? So that's kind of is a big question mark in terms of why people are still not changing. And even if you go out to the outside industry like the F&B and retail, and the first thing is when you start telling them about that, they'll tell you about the dashboards that they have and the reports that they have, but they can't actually tell you what's happening in their organization today. They can tell you what has happened in the last 6 months. 6 months ago, this is where we are. Now, where are we now? Most people are not clear and they are struggling to deal with that. And that's the reason why I decided to actually focus in the data space, because I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, even though it's a topic that has been often discussed quite a bit. So today I'll just run through some of the high level stuff and then we'll open up for discussion. I think that the key part is what can data do for us in general? Why is it hard to use data and how to be efficient with data, right? I think that there's a key point. Now, this is the three main thing when people look at, right? Whether you are a startup, whether you are a retail company, you are fintech, or you are a financial bank itself, the only purpose for data is to actually generate more revenue, right? And the reason for that is once you have data points, you can know your customer better. You know exactly when do they shop for your product, what do they like to buy, when would they buy, when are they going to come back to you. So for example, if you look at in the banks, right, you have your mortgage. They will track when your mortgage is coming up. They will track your credit. They'll know what they can afford to give you. They'll track your network access assets so that they can actually upsell you on certain products that you have actually not used. So that is actually a very good tool um, for growing a business. And in the area of, let's say, hospitality, what they do is they use the data points to actually identify how many of my customer are Americans, are they single, are they couple, do they come with family, do they come on specific period of the year, what is their spend on F&B, on retail, on services, on sports, so that the next time they come back, you actually cater a package that is specific to their needs, that maximize the revenue that you can get from them rather than underselling it. So it goes into your pricing also. Once you know your customer, you know what the right price it is to set so that you can earn more from there. Now, the other piece that people look for is how do they improve their marketing and operational ROI? Now, when we look at marketing is, especially with this new norm happening, right? Banks, non-banks, everyone are going out on digital media. So people are spending on Google ads, Facebook ad, they are getting bloggers to write content. But in reality, it's very tough to actually know if it's actually useful. Now, it could actually be deriving a lot of clicks for you, but there could be no end result. So you have a lot of people clicking, but nobody buying, right? Or you could have attracted wrong group of people that you are not expecting to attract, right? People that are not going to buy your service, but because your ads are set up incorrectly and it's attracting those people to click. So you're wasting your click and your cost per click and cost per impression for every cent that you pay. So marketing is an area that is heavily in focus right now when it looks at from a data standpoint. Now, the other aspect is really the operational side of things, which in most cases is still very much neglected, right? Because when most business owner or most global heads, everyone think about revenue. Nobody think about ops cost, right? But that is where the greatest efficiency can be gained from data. So for example, let's say if you're in the retail industry or let's say F&B industry, how do you track what is your theoretical cost versus your actual cost? Theoretical cost that is derived from the product that you have sold versus what you have purchased, and what is the variance against that? And are there large amount of wastage? Is there large amount of over portioning of food that you want to make it clear to your outlet managers so that they can manage that? So that is an example of how do you improve operational ROI, right? Another way is if you look at banks, right? They are running lots of transformation programs. If you're in the banking industry, you would know by now, there's this huge move from waterfall to agile. People are saying that this is a miraculous methodology. Once you're on board, you start becoming 10 times faster, shorter time to effectiveness. But nobody actually measures that. What people actually measures is just the number of tasks, the number of requirements, the number of JIRAs that has been raised and fixed. But nobody actually measure how effective are these fixes, how effective are these in terms of generating revenue for me. Nobody look at that, right? And it's a classic scenario when you start looking at the front office, right? So the front office within the bank, they will want every single thing, right? Now, whether you will give them the return on investment is a big question mark. They will just ask for it, and on the basis that they are earning the biggest, they're managing the biggest portfolio, everybody has to listen, right? But the end state might be very different, where you spend $1 million developing what he needs, but you don't even get $500,000 back from returns. So that is a very, very classical scenarios that I've seen for many years in the banks. And And I think it boils down back to the purpose of adopting change. It has to be genuine in nature rather than of form, right? It needs to be of substance. And a lot of it is driven by form rather than substance. So rather than calling it a project manager, you call it a scrum master. Instead of calling it your business owner, your business manager, you call them a product owner, right? But that doesn't really change much because fundamentally you still have the same culture and mindset. And the last part that people, what are they looking to do is really to save time and resource, right? Because of the scarcity of resource and skill set and the time required to do some of this data work. And you'd be surprised is that all organizations are still heavily using spreadsheets, right? Now, spreadsheets is not bad, right? In fact, I love spreadsheet, right? There's so many things I can do on spreadsheet, but it should not be a organization standard as a tool for managing your data because it's not sustainable, right? You have a maximum of 1.2 million records in your spreadsheet. And by the time you have that number of records, your machine will crawl till it for a long time, right? You will not be able to use it at all. And the surprising thing is when we go out to the industry and we look at what they do in the F&B retail hospitality space, it's not surprising that they are still using spreadsheets, but the way they use spreadsheets are ridiculous. So you have someone looking at a piece of invoice and manually keying it into the spreadsheet. They probably do not know how to use the formula and they are actually manually calculating and putting in the final value in another cell, right? So that is the kind of the lack of skill sets in there and requires a lot of manpower, which makes you become inefficient. And now when you look at the banks, which you think they are very good in numbers, very good in Excel spreadsheet, right? You still have tons of people doing it. So just go into a finance team today, you probably see tons of spreadsheets, right? Which is their main system. The other systems are probably just used like 1-2 hours a day. Majority of the time is on spreadsheet. Reconciliation is done on spreadsheet, not on system, because system is not doing what they are supposed to do because IT is too slow, so they do it outside on their spreadsheet, right? Project teams are also doing the same thing, right? There's many systems that's put in place, but it's too complicated. So I'll do it on my spreadsheet. At the end of the month, when senior managers need to see something, I do a one-time upload or I get an intern to manually key in all the entries into that system. So all these hidden costs, right, are costs that people do not account for, but are actually taking up a lot of time. And during this new norm where manpower is in shortage, that's where people start to feel the pressure to actually improve because they no longer can find a cheap resource and dump someone there. They really need to find someone. And is it worth spending $6,000-7,000 on a resource and their job is just to look at spreadsheet? It's a big question mark, to be honest. I would say that even in the banking days, I've seen people who are paid like tens of $1,000s and the whole day they're only looking at spreadsheets, right? Because they're cleaning up the data that is so bad. And sometimes I wonder, what they're paid for, right? Are they paid to be Excel grinders or are they paid to be management teams? So that's the key part when it comes to data and company needs. Now, this is a very high level overview of how data can be used across the entire value stream, right? So one of the key things to note is that no organization works in silo. I think that's a very important concept that I brought forward from the banking days, right? The front office itself is not the entire bank, right? In order for sales, for trading, for life cycle to actually happen in the bank, you need to have an operations team that can support the settlements and the payment. If you don't do the payments on time, you get fined, you get fees. If you don't send out the right confirmation, you send it to the wrong counterparty, you get problem on reputational damages. And then you have your finance team who is constantly doing checks and balance of your P&L, your attributions, all of that. And you have your risk team, right? To look at whether are you over leveraging, are you going beyond? And you got to take in consideration the entire value stream to know if we are effective. There's no point if trading is very efficient and operations is not efficient, because that become your bottleneck. And at the point of with the high frequency of activity happening today, so even if you look at in retail, there's so much uh, transaction that's taking place on various e-commerce channels. If your finance team is not able to handle it, you'll be in trouble, right? So you just have to stack on more resources to cope with the inefficiencies that you have, which means that the value that you gain from your e-commerce channel is also eroded away. So that is a very classic example of issues within the retail space. And if you look at the area of in the banking segment, right? So many traders or sales structurers will want to push out new products, but for every new project, they actually put in 20 more manual efforts across different teams. And the cost per trade is actually very high. But the only reason why it's done is because the cost per trade is not measured on a daily basis, right? So the traders have no view in terms of what's the cost. They only have a view of the P&L, which doesn't include the cost of operations, doesn't include the cost of IT, finance, and they get rewarded on that basis. And that's the real problem in large organization at times, is when you have this disparate focus and this break of views across the whole value stream. And this is just a illustration of how data is actually being used as it's iterative things, right? It doesn't end from there. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is, very often you start off with a high level view, right? What's happening with my business? What does the revenue landscape look like? And then you might zoom in to look at the contributors of the revenue. And then you might look at, okay, once I know the contributors of revenue, what channels do I want to focus? What P&L streams do I want to look at where I'm getting the biggest gain, right? And then you want to strategize from there in terms of what you want to do next. So that is actually a very important thing, because once you strategize, you want to make sure that the action that you take is actually resulting in a result on your overall revenue. And most importantly, even if you look at, and this apply in many cases, to be honest, right? So it also comes down to, let's say if you're doing your own trading, because we were talking about personal trading just now with Vincent. You have to first look at, okay, what is your revenue look like? What are you good at, right? Are you good with FX? Are you good with options? Are you good with equity? If you're good in FX, are you good in a specific currency where you realize you have a better understanding or your strategy is actually working better? And then you need to dig into that specific strategy that you have and look at, when am I correct and when am I wrong? How often am I right and how often am I wrong, right? How do I adjust my take profit and my stop loss, right? For me to actually get more. And then you come up with new strategies, or you say, okay, this is something new that I have done. Put it into your trading strategy. It could be algo, it could be non-algo. And then track, once you have done that, let it run and then see what's the impact, right? But the reality with most personal trading is that sometimes you don't let it run, right? Because when the market move and swing drastically, most people will let emotions kicks in, and that's where the issue always happens with personal trading. And it's also very similar to uh, real life scenario of running a business, right? Like for marketing, right? Someone will kick out a Google Ads today and expect to see result in 3-4 weeks time, right? 3-4 days time, but it probably hasn't have enough time for the strategy to run, so you couldn't actually see if it's working. So things like that is kind of applicable in all scenarios of our life, from running a business, whether in retail, in bank, or even in our personal trading life, or even things that you might do with your own personal investment, right? Whether it's right or wrong. Now, the problem is all this sounds very easy, but in reality, it's not. And the reason why it's not easy is when you're dealing with too many data sets, right? You have too many cooks all over the place. So the same thing can be called multiple things in different teams, right? And people have different forms, people have different formats, right? And having a common dictionary becomes essential. And there's a classic issues that all organizations face, even within the bank, right? Terminology of trade events will be different from every very team, right? Operations will have a view of what the term should be, finance will have a term, and then you have an industry body who have a taxonomy created, which is entirely different terms again. So everyone has a different terminology, means putting all this data together becomes very hard. So how we align the data dictionary across the organization is actually very important. And we want to refrain from having, like a chicken and a duck trying to speak each other language, but we can't, right? And for data, A is A, B is B, right? So the moment that is not the same is not the same. There's no like going around it and explaining how it is. It's already processed and done. So that's where the difficulty is. The second thing is the amount of systems that we use. There has been a crazy outburst of systems, right, in the last few years. People are just putting in more new system. One day, someone will be this unicorn come out, is very good. Everyone start using another unicorn come out. Someone use another system. So it becomes very difficult, and it's not entirely a bad thing because systems should be chosen for what they're good at, rather than trying to bastardize it and put everything into one. But managing it has its own difficulties. And how do you align that together is very important. And if you are familiar in the banking space, right, you will see that also a lot in trading system, right? You have one platform for FX, you have one platform for derivatives, you have tons of platform, right? And your vendors will love you for that, right? Because every single instance you have, you just pay more money. So that is the scenario we are in, right? And the problem is, how do you internally manage that? It could be a very good strategy because FX is high frequency, the derivative is high intensity for calculation. So the demand is very different, right? There's no one size fit all solution. But the problem comes back to the organization itself on how they actually connect all this data together, which is the most important. And the last part is really the lack of data and tech skill set in general. So first of all, when you look at data, right, there are not many people who can actually see what's in data. A lot of what they see is just number and text and the column headers, right? They take it as it is, but they're not able to dig deeper and draw conclusion or relate this to another set of data, which may be similar but have different column labels. Because the labels are different, you deem it as being different. So that goes back down to the terminology issues, right? And that skill set is really what is lacking in the industry today, and it's very domain focused. So the less you know of a domain, it's harder for you to be good in dealing with that set of data. But there's an underlying fundamentals. Is one, you're able to see beyond the domain and the data and the lineage that it creates by itself, then you will be able to move this. And when we start talking about data scientists, that's also kind of a overhyped term to some extent. In reality, there isn't really many data scientists out there. A lot of the data scientists that they call themselves are actually data analysts, or they're just programmers dealing with data, right? That doesn't make them a data scientist per se. There's a lot of math that goes behind data science. People are like of PhD for physics, for maths, and then they are coming out with complex model. Those are really the data scientists, right? But in the market today, majority of them are not that. Majority of them are just people who go through Excel spreadsheet for highly paid people and giving them a good title called data scientist, right? So that's also how we look beyond some of the terminologies that's out there in the market today and really see for ourselves what it really means. And when it comes down to tech skill set, it's even harder because there's a lot of tech knowledge out there in the markets, right? So there's a lot of people who can code, but not many people can do it well. So when we look at this specific area, we are talking about I could build a feature or functionality or for 100 data points. But the moment my data points go beyond 1,000, it starts to slow down. When it starts to go beyond 100,000, it starts to not work. When it goes beyond 1,000,000, it doesn't run at all, right? So there's other aspect that comes into picture. Things like how do you cope with data variances? How do you cope with size of data, performance, networking, and all of this become a need to have when you're dealing with data in general. And that's also one of the reasons why, if you look at some of the big companies like Teradata, which deal with data specifically, the consultants are paid like 3,000 to 4,000 a day. And the only reason why they're paid that much money is because they are really the expert in that space, right? And if you go out into the market and someone say, you pay me $200 a day, I'm a data expert, something is wrong, right? You can't possibly be a data expert at that price compared to something else. So these are some of the areas that we try to look at, and we realize that there is generally a lack of these talents out there. So at a high level, this is what you need, right? To get what you need at the end of the day. You need data, you need to collect them, right? At any source that you can. And don't always focus on your core data set. So for example, if you're running your own trading, right? Don't just look at the price, right? The price itself is just one factor. What you want to look at also is the company's balance sheet. And you should be collecting that data in some digital form rather than having it in a PDF, which you can't use it. You should be collecting things like events that are happening in the market, which you see a lot of the algo trading activities actually do that, is that they scrape the market and then they actually classify this market news into specific sentiments and directions, right? And this information is constantly being fine-tuned, right? It may happen for this one movement is because of this, but another movement is not because of this. And you need to accumulate these data over a period of time before you can get more accurate. And that's one of the key part when it comes down to data. When it comes down to organization-wise, you might want to collect this data from various teams, right? It's not just your sales data, you want your cost data, you want your labor data, you want the number of hours spent data. How do you effectively collect this is important. Now, the one thing I'll just talk about data collection is try not to go overboard with data collection also. So in some organization, they are so into data collection, they make everybody fills in 10, 20, 30 fields for every single things they have to do, right? It's just a nightmare. So I remember the days when I was running projects and people wanted more visibility. So they just added more fields, right? They added like 30 different fields and everything is mandatory and required. So it pissed off everyone, right? Because for them to fix the problem, it probably takes them 10 minutes. But for them to fill in the form, it takes them 20 minutes. So those are the things that it's good to collect, but it also have to be practical. And there's a thought process that needs to go through. What is enough? And how do you slowly get more of it? And if you really do need to get the data, how do you automate getting the data rather than making a person key in? Because as long as you make a person key in, it will always be wrong. That should be the underlying assumption, is that 50% will be wrong. There's no way of training anyone to be 100% correct in data entry, right? And the last part is really to democratize the data, right? There's no point just having yourself having access to the data where other people are not having, right? So when you start pulling in data points from different set of people, and you start to be able to learn from it. So if you take an example of, let's say, insurance agent, right? Insurance agents are all individual solo entrepreneur running their own business, but their scope of data is so small because it just surrounds them. But the moment the insurance agents are able to come together, if one day they decide that, strength is better in numbers than alone, there's no point keeping your customer data if you can grow bigger, then there might be a different impact to the overall industry when they come together, because they would be able to profile their customer better, and they're able to know who can actually service this customer when I can't service this customer. So those are very important things. And then when you start looking at organization, it's the same thing, right? There's no point recreating a set of data that someone else has already done, which we do it all the time, right? It's just that we don't actually account for all the time wastage as a result of that. So I think that is the key parts that I wanted to run through. This is more in terms of generally what happens if you want to have a good data pipeline, right? Automation pipeline. The first thing you need to think is, how are you going to collect the data? Where do you store the data? You need to identify the relationship between the data, and there will always be relationship. And how do you automatically classify profile, calculate the matrix, and finally explore it, right? I think that those are the key things that every organization needs to have to be able to actually use data efficiently. And even if you're running your own trading itself, you should also have that ability to some extent. If it's entirely dependent on you, click, look at something, have a gut feel, and then move on, you're bound to make judgment calls based on how you feel and know what the data is telling you. And that's majority of the scenario when it comes down to decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. Yep. So I'll probably open up the floor for discussion.
Thanks, Melvin, for the very insightful sharing and so on. The first questions I have is that I saw this Muslim Trust fund. So for your case, do you also handling some
Yes.
Islamic finance and then need to process accordingly?
No. So we are not doing Islamic finance, Islamic banking. Basically, the Muslim Trust Fund is a non-profit organization that help underprivileged kids and family. So for them, there's a lot of applications for funding support from underprivileged families. So they have to process a lot of all this data. And it could be one family could have 4 applications because they have 4 different kids or related members, and they could be having multiple funding. And then you have to take it to the investment that came in terms of distributions of funds. So that's what we're actually helping them with, not on the Islamic banking side.
Thanks a lot. So any questions from the audience?
I have one crazy question actually. Melvin, is very interesting walkthrough. I think it's a very good reminder for all of us, right? Garbage in, garbage out, right? Basically. So Melvin, this is the crazy question. If I were to set up a new company today, so forget about all the legacy problem, right? We are talking about so many systems that already spaghetti, right? When I work for Standard Chartered Bank, they have more than 300 satellite systems outside the core banking, right? So if you recreate Standard Chartered Bank, you have to dismantle the whole bank, right? To be able to change it. So let's forget about legacy issue, because I think there is no cure to that legacy problem. Yeah, you can change so many CIO, CFO, CTO. Nobody will dare to touch the spaghetti system, right? Then you end up having the same Standard Chartered Bank like 30 years ago. If I have the liberty to set up a new company, and I want to make use of your knowledge, your system, your tools, and everything, I would say that, okay, let's make it AI enabled. So the data collection, data acquisition, everything automatic. You can sniff, you can listen, you can whisper, whatever. And then you process it also automatically. You use AI capability to process it. And then the output is also AI engine. And I want AI also to do action, right? Because today you give the Tableau to the boss, and the boss say, I don't want to read Tableau, right? I will make decision without Tableau, right? So forget it. Forget about the human being. Huh? So I want 99% of my decision and action is done by machine, A to Z. Only 1%, only 1% that to certain extent my AI engine is not designed to make decision, it will come back to me. But other than that, I don't believe in human being. for whatever you say, hey, this data scientist is crap. You can handle only 200 dimension, right? But my AI engine can handle 300,000 dimension.
Right.
And if I put quantum computing, there is no limit. So how do you think today technically is possible? This dream, can I realize in today technology?
Yeah,
That only
I think
1% will come back to me to make decision and action. Other than that, hey, machine, go ahead and fire guys on behalf of me, right?
yeah, I can. So to be entirely honest, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a bit that's probably unrealistic. And
It's too futuristic, is it?
It's not too futuristic. I think the problem that we get overclouded by AI, quantum physics, and all this kind of things, right? I'm not saying that it's not good. I think it's great. I think there's a lot of use for it. But fundamentally, it needs to come down to one thing is how much do you know about your business, right? And every single way that it works. So even you take like an organization like Stanchart, right? So I was also there, right? So if you just look at the department, the simplest department, which is confirmation, right? Settlements and confirmations. There are 1,001 scenarios of how those are being processed. Different regulations, different steps, different requirements, different customization, right? To be able to build all this and run it automatically, you require first to find those people who know. But the problem is you can't even find those people who knows all the scenario. You probably have to find like 50 people and you're only covering half of the scenario. Because that's the real problem within some of the organization today, right? It's like everything is automated away. Nobody knows what's happening. If you look at the product control, every day they just click a button, right? Something pops up, not reconciling, call IT, and then try to figure out. So I think before you can get to that stage, you first need that knowledge of how to run that business.
Correct.
And that scenarios that it covers from the front to the operations to the finance and every aspect. So you can scope it down to be very, very small so that you have control.
I stop you there. I stop you there because basically what you are saying is technical. The issue is the design of the system. Because if I have the knowledge and I know the entire A to Z process, I can design straight through processing, I can design API, I can design anything, a workflow to clone me into the system, right? So
so assume you have that functional knowledge, right?
No,
assume you have
me it's a design issue. So if I have money and I can recruit 300 very knowledgeable people who know marketing, sales, operation, anything, put it into a training room and lock them up for 1 month and tell them, okay, please create for me the entire input, process, output, A to Z. So to me, if these people can create the design, do you think that the technology is able today to transform this design into a fully automated 99%, not 100%, because I still want to punch a button, right? By the end of the day, then I say, hey, if you want to fire people, don't fire first. You let me see whether pretty or not pretty, right? Before you fire.
So my honest
it's a design issue, isn't it? It's not a technical capability of system today. Am I right?
I think the problem comes in system design is dependent on people. So fundamentally, it's going to be a people issue. So assuming that you have no people issue, the secondly is you need to have shitload of money. And the second thing, if you were to have the chance to do that, then there will be other organizations that would be at the forefront of doing it because they have access to the right set of people. And by the time you are able to do 99% of it automatically, most likely that 1% will not be left to you to choose. Because the 99% will tell you that you shouldn't be part of the equation and they will just run it on your own. So I think it's a bit of a futuristic question, but I think that the day that it gets to be 99%, that 1% will no longer be an option, because that will no longer be a choice that you take.
Yeah. So by then, machine rule the world, right?
Yeah, then we are going into the sci-fi world.
Yeah. But
it's
very
still
interesting.
long.
Actually, we are now designing that system. And we are looking at a couple of things. Of course, then we are not as big as Standard Chartered Bank, right? But
Yeah.
if I were to start with a small system, a small process, a small product,
Yes.
from what I
Can
hear
be more
from you,
efficient.
yeah, I mean
You can be more
technologically, is enough tools and enough technology today there, right?
Yes.
Is really a matter of putting this input process output into the equation. And of
Yes.
course, then if I can do ICO to fund it, Mervyn, then probably no problem with money, right? Because now people say ICO can bring any money that I need, right?
I don't know. So far, I haven't seen a situation where I'm flooded with money.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. Thank you. I think we should have a separate session to discuss about it, because we do have a real case that we want to do like that.
Right. I think even if you look at some of the digital banks today, which they are trying to build the bank from scratch, right?
Yes.
I think a lot of the design principle that goes into it is you want to get to that stage, right? Is how do you take baby steps and how do you lay the right foundation, so that you can get there. And ultimately, the foundation should be driven by data points, which is actually the core business of many companies today. So if you look at Deliveroo, if you look at Grab, they're not doing any other businesses but data.
They will be gone soon, Melvin. Trust me. These people who don't have the A to Z, they will be replaced by robot.
Yeah. So there is so many players out there that are driven entirely by data. Even Amazon, the Googles, they're all driven by data, right?
Yeah.
And even if you look at some of the hedge funds and all that, they are running their algo trading and so forth, it's all driven by data, where they're able to process billions of scenarios in milliseconds, where a human just couldn't do that, right? So eventually you will come to that stage. And that's the most important fundamentals to lay down. And then we'll come down to the technical infrastructure of how do you support large volume of activities and data flow and transaction. And those problems are where you go into the real depth of technology, where you can't easily find resources for that. Because those are deep into how machines work, how the bytes actually move, how much kilobytes or bytes of active data you're sending through. So all that require a lot of deep tech itself. Yeah.
Thank you, Mervyn. We'll have separate discussion. A very interesting topic. Thank you.
Yes.
One summarizing statement: data is the new gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions from the rest?
Arun have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. So Melvin, you mentioned a few times about personal trading and how data can possibly help. I'm a little curious about that. The reason being that if you look at Zax or any service, even at a personal finance level, if you subscribe to, they give you curated data, right? Well-processed, curated data from multiple sources around sentiments, around company performance, any metrics that you can think of, past, future, industry trends on specific stocks, right? So over and above, right? Do you find are you talking about something which is different, or are you talking about the same thing?
It's more in terms of how you use the data. So you have a lot of this data, right? And it comes in different forms. So some of it is written in some form of essays, some are given to you in spreadsheets, some of it are calendar events that comes about, right? The question is, how do you programmatically use it to help you make decisions? I think that the keyword is programmatically, right? And secondly, when we talk about being programmatic, you also need to have a underlying strategy of yours, right? That can utilize all of these data points and make a final decision from there. So for example, you might get a calendar event, you might get a price movement for the last 24 hours or the last, you have to decide whether you want to use price movement of 24 hours or you want to use price movement of the last 6 hours or 2 hours, depending on the type of traders you are. And you might have to look at events, which period of events are relevant to you, which are not. You might want to look at what are the correlated instruments that might be affecting this. And you will need to put all this together in your spreadsheet or in the tools that you are using to be able to churn this through automatically without you sitting there and trying to put it into spreadsheets. Because that's usually the tipping point for most personal traders, right? Is that a lot of it fundamentally is still run by gut because none of this is automated, right? Unless there are some programmers who actually do it from scratch. And then the next thing is how you actually experiment with your strategies, get the feedback on your P&L through this entire process, and allow you to refine that and actually move on from there. So it's the how rather than just the what data, right?
Yep, got it.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Just to add to the Rudy's questions, because he's very passionate about AI and so on. So I was thinking the system itself, how to cater for the future development, because let's say we have an existing system and then he designed and built AI on it, but maybe 3 years down the road, there can be a separate system come in, how the current one can actually slowly adapt and slowly so-called, a lot of future migration or a lot to cater for it and then expand it from that sense. Is it possible that way to cater for future format and technology?
Yeah, so AI by itself is not technology. AI itself is maths, right? I think that's where people start to forget about what actually drives a lot of this topic. It's all maths, right? So when people talk about AI, it's all about modeling, right? And how do you model that into a mathematical formula and run the mathematical formula across a large set of data, right? And an ever increasing form of data. And how do you write logics for it to self-check itself and redefine what is the correct results? And often it's supervised AI. So it's very seldom that you have an AI that runs on your own and go crazy, right? It's always supervised. And when it comes down to technology changes itself, the model itself doesn't change, but the power that you get access to changes. So for example, the amount of data so AI probably existed a long time ago when people was creating mathematical formula on smaller set of data, but the problem is that the cost of hosting all these servers and all this power is extremely costly and nobody can do it, right? And there was no internet where data was flowing in and there were no APIs, right? So what's going to happen is people are going to grow the amount of data that's injected to this AI. Machines are going to grow cheaper and cheaper, and technology are going to be available where you can scale from 1 server to 500 server to 1,000 server over a small period of time and run your compute across all of that. It's just going to help. It's not going to fundamentally change, obstruct so-called AI, because AI is not a language. It's just math, right? And math works on everything per se.
Any questions from the audience? I believe that there are some audience actually are students. So if they actually want to go into become a data scientist, right? So your advice for them, and then maybe it's on the right track, it's the right trend, or it's not good enough, you go for a PhD.
I think it's so if you want to go for PhD, you first of all you need to be a bit nutsy to go into that space, or PhD for maths and physics, right? Because it's probably not going to be easy. And if you want to go into the data space, it doesn't mean that you have to be a PhD. You just have to scale your expectation accordingly, and you learn along the way, right? And I think the most important thing that people need to realize is obviously Excel skill sets are very important. You should pick up something like Python. I think that's also very important. And you need to like tech. I think that's the main focus of anyone going to the data space. And the second part that you really also need to learn if you really want to go into data is that you need to learn about your business domain that you're going into. Data without business domain is sometimes quite useless. The reason behind it is it's like money. So if you give money to a guy who have never run F&B before, he have plenty of money, he'll just splurge it. But he will never make the F&B work because he doesn't know what works for F&B. He will just say, oh, my customer wants abalone. Okay, just sell abalone. Oh, but we are not making a lot of money. The vendor is not good. Never mind, let's buy another one, right? So they don't know how to manage the cost. They don't have the business acumen. They don't know the domain, right? So it's not sufficient just having one aspect. To me, it's even if you are going into the tech space, it's the same thing. If you just know tech but you don't know the business, it doesn't work. And that's the reason why when like in the banking days, right, when we work with a lot of the junior people or people who are like in tech space, the guys that actually progress further in the organizations are people who understand the domain, or people who talk, right, who are very good at talking. And that's the other skill set, right? But that one is pretty much a gift and a culture thing. So if you get yourself in the right connection, right groups of people, you pick it up along the way, or you have innate nature of that works, right? But besides that, I think domain is very important.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? If not, Melvin, can you flash your contact? Yeah. So yeah, you have this last page, correct? So that I think the audience can contact you if they have further questions. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So if there's no questions, thank you very much, Melvin. It's very insightful. Yeah, I think this is a very valuable lessons, valuable sharing session. Okay. Right. So thank you very much. And then for those that would like to find out more, please contact Melvin. And thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melvin.
See you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Vincent, and everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.